Welcome back to the People Side of Automotive. I'm your host, Mandy DeVoe. Today we're talking about the issues that are keeping dealership leaders up at night, finding and keeping qualified technicians. Every store feels this pain, and the shortage is no longer a prediction, it's become a reality. Even if every current automotive student graduated tomorrow, we'd still be tens of thousands of techs short. My guest today is Chris Simpkins. He is a third generation technician and now an automotive program coordinator at ATI. He's in the trenches every day preparing the next generation of talent and watching too many of them walk right back out of the industry. We're going to dig into what's driving this crisis: outdated pay structures, the death of true apprenticeship, the knowledge drain as veteran techs retire, and the culture disconnect that pushes good people out. If you're serious about technician recruitment and retention, this is the perspective for you because you can't grow a dealership if you can't staff the shop. And you can't staff the shop if new techs burn out faster than you can hire them. Let's get into the real work and fix the talent pipeline. Hey, thank you so much for joining me today on the People Side of Automotive podcast. I was hoping we could just start off, maybe introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you and kind of what you're up to.
Okay. Well, my name is Chris Simpkins. I am the automotive program coordinator here at ATI in Virginia Beach, Virginia. A little bit about my background. I'm kind of like a third generation technician, going all the way back to my grandfather. And with that, it's kind of like gives me a lot of perspective to see how this industry has changed.
Hmm.
Um, I spent some time serving in the Navy where I learned electronics and everything. And whereas my grandfather and my father's day, it wasn't that big of a deal, it's really been a benefit to me to use my electronics training to help me transition into these more modern cars that we're seeing every day. Um, and a lot of what I'm doing right now is focusing on helping to encourage and inspire the next generation of technicians because I think like we were talking about, the biggest challenge that we face is the massive shortage of technicians in this country, and the
Absolutely.
fact that if we graduate every single tech that we have in school right now, we still won't make a dent in our shortage. We're somewhere around in the neighborhood of about 69 to 70,000 technicians short of what
Wow.
we need to keep the industry afloat.
Yeah, that is so mind-blowing to me when we were just discussing that before we were recording. And it just makes me think back to that article that you just published today. Maybe you can talk about that a little bit, but it was so crazy for me to read that since 19 you sorry, it was 1980 and
Hmm.
you were making the comparison to today and how nothing has changed. And you can truly see why it's such a struggle. And my comment back to your post was that we were boiling the frog, like we weren't really paying close enough attention. Over the years, I've had so many conversations on the variable side, and I will be the first to admit that I didn't even see this happening and was in front of my own face, just how disconnected things are on the technician side and how challenging it is for them to really survive on a livable wage, let alone everything inside the shop. So like the culture and all of that stuff. And I did have a question for you based off your article. I was going to say, how much of the economy and the current buying power of the dollar do you think is for blame for the current state with the technicians? So if we're talking about the discrepancy, like you were breaking down the dollar amount and the buying power, so do you think that it's the economic state that's making it so hard for the technicians, or is it just the fact that dealerships are still living in the Stone Age?
The biggest thing for me is that the money is there. The dealerships are there, making record profits, you know. And yes, things get more expensive. That's the nature, but that expense translates across the board. It costs more to run a dealership. It costs more to run a shop. But while the profits of the dealerships and the shops have gone up, and a lot of my conversations tend to focus on the dealerships strictly because there's so many more dealerships that you see turning service work than you're going to see the independent shops. So that's why a lot of my conversations start there because they also employ the majority of students coming out of these tech schools like mine and so many others across the country. The dealerships turning record profits. but yet it's not translating to technicians earning, you know, good salaries and everything. And a lot of that has to do not necessarily with inflation, although that does play some factor in it. A lot of it has to do with the fact that it is that mindset, well, this is the way it's always been done, so why do we need to change?
Absolutely. So, one of the things that I've actually seen come up a lot in conversation over the last week or two is talking about the concept of an apprentice. And someone made the comment that that was a word that had disappeared from technician vocabulary for a while. So I'm really curious because you're working with these students before they become an apprentice. Like how are you preparing them for what's to come once they get into the industry? Because I know that we really need to find those pieces. Like you were saying, the goal here is to have more conversations about this. How can we attract technicians? What can we do differently to keep them here and in the industry and thriving? So, how are you preparing those technicians to step into an apprenticeship role, knowing that they're likely paired with a much more experienced technician who's working flat rate and may not be compensated properly for their time as they support that apprentice?
Yeah. The biggest thing is that it's one of the biggest pieces missing from our industry in the US is the apprentice role. Too many times we spend a year and a half, 2 years training somebody to be an automotive technician. They get to the dealership and they're immediately put on a quick lube team where all they're doing is changing oil, changing tires, and they'll do that for 6 months. And, if they can do some oil and tires and brakes, they're like, okay, you're a full-fledged technician. Here's your bay, get your
Mm-hmm.
tools and go to work. And they're missing the component where they're working with a seasoned technician. Some shops have realized this and they're actually doing it. But by and large, most shops are not. They're taking these techs straight from the quick lube team and putting them into their own bay and then shocked when they don't succeed. And that's
Yeah.
something that needs to change. We need to take the time to create an apprentice role that truly apprentices and learns beside these senior techs. We have technicians that have decades of experience and knowledge, and they're aging out of the industry. And when they age out, because they're not able to turn what we call in the industry flat rate hours and be productive, they
Mm-hmm.
age out and they retire or they just leave the industry because they can't physically do it anymore. And they take all that knowledge with them.
Yeah,
So,
that is definitely the biggest loss to a dealership is the knowledge that they're not able to have transferred to the next generation of techs.
and that's where the apprentice role is so crucial that we get that back. Stop, if we get somebody as a quick lube, that's fine a place to start to get them used to the environment. But when they come off of that, they need to be really paired with a senior technician, and that senior technician needs to be compensated in a way that incentivizes teaching and
Hmm.
passing on that knowledge. And right now they're not. They're like, you have to turn your flat rate hours, and this guy is going to try to stand here and learn from you, but he has to turn his flat rate hours too.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the feedback I'm getting from technicians is that they're expected to do so much and they feel so undervalued. They don't feel like they're being respected just in general as a person in the shop, but on top of that, the hours that they're paid for, like they just don't feel like anything is working in their favor, that it's a win-win for the apprentice coming in and or like the new person coming in, the new student and the dealership, but it's really that person with all that experience who's invested in themselves over years and their tools and all of that who's really losing. And that just puts a bad taste in anyone's mouth. So we can see why that would be a retention problem as well. So
Yeah,
it sounds like what we need to do is create this movement where bring back the apprentice. How do we start this conversation? How do we get more people to acknowledge this and bring this on? Do you think it's having conversations dealer to dealer and just having like explaining to them or showing them these things, or how do you think we should approach this?
it has to be a conversation, and it has to be it's it unfortunately we've tried going from the bottom up, and now it has to be where we have the leaders starting at the top and telling the dealerships, hey, look, the way you've been doing things may have worked in the past, but we're looking at the big picture and it's not working anymore because we're hemorrhaging technicians and we're hemorrhaging experience and knowledge. And this is not a recipe for continued success. And I'm hoping that, if we can get some of those people at the top to sit down with the dealerships and say, let's look at your program. What is your turnover rate? What is your turnover rate amongst new techs? How many seasoned techs and do you have? And what age are they? And what is their productivity versus when they were in their 20s or 30s? You know?
Hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting. Like, I, it's just how do we get them on board? Like, you mentioning that going top down and thinking of like OEM level top down, if we go that high, I'm thinking about everything that's been happening with the EVs. So, not to make it a political conversation, but OEMs and everyone has been bringing out EVs and they're mandating the dealerships to kind of roll with that. We have all these incentives coming from the government that are about to leave. But the feedback I've heard from some GMs is that it's been hard to chase down those incentives. Most of the time, they're losing money when they're selling EVs. But on top of that, it's adding extra pressure to the already struggling technician portion of this. Like they have to keep up with that technology, they have to keep investing in everything. So do you think that we're going to be able to survive this, or what do you think the next step or the next outcome is going to be in the next few years if they do keep pushing to have EVs and we keep having this shortage of people coming into this field?
Um, it's it's kind of like the scenario that I hope we can avoid, that somewhere we have that moment of clarity to where everybody sits down together and says, this is not working. What we've been doing is not working. And I'm afraid if we don't have that moment of clarity, it's going to get to a point to where you're going to be selling vehicles, not just the EVs, but any vehicle, and
Mm-hmm.
customers are going to buy them, and then they're going to come back with a warranty issue, and the dealer is going to have to tell them, sorry, we don't have anybody that can do that. If you need an oil change or a tire rotation, we got you, but we don't have anybody to work on your stuff. And
Yeah.
then it becomes an issue where it doesn't matter what great new thing the dealer or the OEM is doing. If you can't sell a car at all because you can't work on the car, customers will eventually abandon you. They want to buy your car, but if they can't get it repaired or worked on or warranty, then why would they buy it?
Yeah. Oh, 100%. Like, so it is really doom and gloom, like this conversation we're having. So I want to kind of like be a little bit more hopeful. I don't anticipate in the next few years that OEMs will come together. I know there's always been a divide between them and dealers anyway, but what do you think that at the dealership level they could do? Like, I think, I don't know, like, I'm really just trying to wrap my head around how could we communicate to dealerships how important this is? Like, how, because everyone is so different, every dealership runs differently, every market is different, and it's just creating that conversation in a way that the dealers can see it. So maybe it's just more statistics, more recruiting, or maybe they just have to feel that ultimate pain of like, we just can't hire anyone. They're already feeling that, really.
It is the conundrum that we're all facing right now because it's and I'll give you one brief story, and I don't want anybody to take away from this as this is how every dealer is, but it is a personal story. We were at a dealership, and I was working there, and I love the work that I do. I love fixing a car, and it's like I tell my students, what if you got somebody that this is their only mode of transportation, and if they can't get to work, they can't feed their kids, they can't pay their rent, and they can't keep their lights on. And then you come along, you're able to fix their car and they're able to get to work and they can pay their rent, they can feed their kids and they can keep their light on. I take a lot of pride in that.
Hmm.
It's a really great feeling. But then when I worked at this dealership, at the end of the year, they had us sat us down and they fed us lunch and they were going over and they said, you guys have been doing such a great job. We've made more money than we ever have before in the history of this dealership through the service department. And that's because of all of the hard work you guys do. Also, because of the market and inflation and everything, we're having to increase our labor rates, excuse me, from 119 to $135 an hour just to stay somewhat competitive.
Hmm.
And I was like, okay. And then one of the technicians that's actually our senior tech in the shop, he looked at him. He was like, oh, okay. So we're all getting a raise too. The owner looked at him and laughed.
Oh my
He was
God.
like, no, you're not getting a raise. We're just raising our labor rates. And it wasn't 10 minutes later, he's sitting there bragging about the brand new Dodge Viper that he just bought and paid cash for.
Oh my God. I've actually
So,
had a similar situation, but not in automotive.
yeah. And like I said, I don't want anybody to take away that I'm saying every single manager and every single owner of a dealer is like this. I'm sure I've seen some owners and they are phenomenal people and they actually care about each person that works for them. But there is sometimes a disconnect when you get some of the corporations that start going around and buying up dealerships. They'll own 10, 15, 20, 30 different dealerships, and they're looking at a spreadsheet of profit and loss instead of looking at the people that are keeping those numbers going. And that has to change. And it may take to where that profit and loss statement gets so painful to look at, they really sit down and say, okay, what is it that we're missing? A dealership is there to sell cars, but it goes back to just like I was saying, if you can't work on the cars, you're not going to sell cars.
Well, 100%. And like, I've had this conversation a million times that how siloed a dealership is and so many businesses in one. And I was talking about it yesterday, how the sales manager on the variable side always complains to his, or in my experience, they complain to their salespeople about how much it costs in reconditioning because the service department actually bills the sales department as if they're separate businesses. And so that's where I think those elements really tie back to creating the super divide between them. But you're saying that the dealership's job is to sell cars, which absolutely that is part of it, but most of the time they don't make a lot of money on that. They really heavily rely on the fixed ops side, and this is the part that's so mind-boggling, is that it is so important to the dealership. And clearly, as that manager you were just talking about showed it, like the he was celebrating the big win that they had, but there's such a disconnect between the responsibility and the celebration. You look at a salesperson who's literally going to make $250 flat rate on a Honda Civic sale. That's what he's going to take home.
Mhm.
And he's the one who's going to be celebrated. He's the one that everyone's like, hey, so let's talk about this guy in the meeting. Like, good job, you sold 5 cars, and like, or 10. But the technician who busted his butt, works the extra hours, he's never going to be celebrated. And they're never going to attribute all of the work that he puts in a week or in a month to bring those numbers up for the dealership. It is really, you can see the disconnect more and more as I have these conversations, and it's really sad. And so we have to go back, I think, to the student piece, because that's really what we have control over at this moment, is how can we prepare them to come in and have them kind of prepared for success. So what do you think we can do to help emphasize the importance of mentorship and of apprenticeship, and have these people asking for that when they come into a dealership?
A lot of it has to do with the exceptions that I see because I've seen, as I've communicated back and forth with multiple people across the nation, you have these pockets where people have already woken up and realized what's going on and they're trying to change it. They're bringing in new technicians from the schools and they're setting them up with an apprenticeship, a true apprenticeship. They're pairing them with a senior technician. And what we have to do is that if we can take those people that are doing the right thing and then show everybody the successes that they're having and not just, being able to retain technicians, but actually the successes in customer satisfaction. Think about how many customers you would have much more satisfied with their service if they're not having to visit your department three, four times to get something fixed. If they're coming and one time and they're getting it fixed the first time, which is what everybody's goal is, fixed right the first time. That's the
Mhm.
famous phrase, right?
Yep.
But if we could highlight more of those dealerships, and it's something that I talk to my students about, I constantly tell them, you know, when you go in to interview for a dealership, you need to be interviewing them too. You need
Yes.
to research them too. If they're posting the same position every couple of months because they're not keeping people, there's something you need to look at. Don't go to some place that keeps hiring the same position over and over and over, not because they're still short, but because they can't keep people. There might be a disconnect there. The interview is just about as much about interviewing the employer as it is about interviewing the candidate.
Today's conversation is sponsored by Drive HRIS. Hiring techs is expensive. Losing them is worse. Drive HRIS is the platform helping dealerships protect their profits by reducing turnover, tightening processes, and creating a safer and more efficient shop environment. If you want your techs to stay and succeed, start with a system that supports them. Find out how at drivehris.com.
So,
Absolutely. I was talking to a former heavy duty shop owner, and he had a huge team of technicians that he led while he owned his shop. And we were talking about that, how to attract mm, good technicians. And the technicians look at those job descriptions and they already know what the job is going to be. Dealerships need to do a better job of promoting what it is about them that makes them special. Like any shop, it doesn't have to be a dealership, it could be any shop at all. And so that advice to give it to the new technicians coming in, definitely spend the time interviewing. Look at the culture. Look at how they post. Are they posting their team on socials and celebrating them? I think that that's a huge indicator of what kind of culture you're going to be looking at. And is their shop clean? Do they keep it clean? Do they pick up their stuff? Like all of those things are indicators of what they're going to get out of their career if they decide to move to a position like that.
yeah.
So,
And there's one quick thing I'll mention before we get
sure.
too far off of it. You were talking about reconditioning cars. I
Hmm.
actually worked for an automotive group, and our job, we created a whole new um, subsection of that group, that automotive group, because it was a big group of automotive dealerships, not just one dealership. So we created this one shop that was a reconditioning center. They took us off of the flat rate system and they paid us based on how many cars. It was based on like how many cars we were turning over, how quickly we were turning them over, getting them
Hmm.
in for trade, reconditioning at a minimum cost because we had literally a spreadsheet we looked at and said, okay, if we buy it at this much, it's going to sell for this much. We have this much room, and we can either fix it for this amount of cost or we can't. If we can't, we're putting it to auction to let somebody else have it. If we can, we're going to repair it, detail it, get it back on the lot, and get it ready to sell. And if it was amazing, the turnaround, they went from cars that were taking 6 to 8 to 10 weeks to get ready to be sold. We had on average, cars were ready 2 days
Oh, I
and ready
believe
to
it.
be sold.
I
And think,
believe it.
and the mechanics, we were all well paid. We were all happy. We all liked what we did because we rotated through jobs. We didn't have one guy stuck on diagnostic all the time. We all rotated. One guy would do diagnostic one week. The next week, he would actually be turning wrenches. The week after that, he would be doing inspections. And we rotated so that it was fair to everybody. Our production was through the roof. We all made good money. The dealership was making more money than ever on used cars. So it proves that you can be profitable without being stuck on that flat rate. And when they took us off of flat rate, they noticed that they stopped having high dollar ticket items and flushes and all this extra cost associated with reconditioning vehicles because the mechanics were not pressured to, kind of inflate
Mm.
need. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. That's so valid. I love that idea. I can definitely see how that would make it better. And I know you wrote about that before. Just I've had varying conversation about this, having both schools of thought. So having people rotate through jobs, but then having people be really good at one thing and having the conversation and learn what it is that they want to work on. But this person who said that was pro flat rate. So it's interesting. In that case of your that dealership that was doing all the recon, would you say that leadership for your team there had some influence on how successful it was?
It was absolutely the leadership. The operations manager that we had, he came from a completely different industry and he looked at it at an operational level and a cost benefit analysis was done. And he sat down and when he basically approached the dealership group and said, look, I want to change the way you do business when it comes to reconditioning cars. And I think if you let me do this, you're going to see increased profits, reduced turnaround time, and y'all are going to be much happier. And he pitched the idea, and then he recruited the people. He sat us down and explained what he wanted, how he wanted it to work. We started setting it up. We worked it out, and once we got our process flow, it worked.
Hmm. So then I'm going to ask you on that team and with that leadership, thinking all that in mind, like what would you say in your perspective would made an A player out of that leader?
The fact that he looked at it as a whole, not just, he wasn't just looking at the cost benefit, or he
Mhm.
wasn't just looking at the turnaround time. He wasn't just looking at any one thing in particular. He looked at the whole process, as well as he also approached it, like I said, when he recruited everyone with the idea that it's like, I'm going to find this team and he found a good mix of people. He found senior techs like myself. He found some middle of the road techs, and then he found some entry level techs. And when he hired those entry level techs, he's like, look, you're going to start off doing this basic stuff. But when you're not doing that basic stuff, you're going to be paired with this person and you're going to be learning because
Hmm.
I want you to grow into that senior tech role and everybody was cross-trained. And think about this. If you have that one guy that's really good at, let's say, diagnostic work, what happens when he wants to go on vacation?
Oh, absolutely.
If that's the only guy you've got that can do diagnostic work, you're basically telling him, sorry, you can't ever go on vacation.
It's so
So,
crazy to me because that manager was hitting on some really key, like people management best practices. So he was thinking about succession planning, cross training, diversity. Like there was so much that he was doing right, like according to the textbook. That is
yes.
awesome, actually, that you could see that in practice.
Yeah, and it again, it's sadly he was the exception to the rule because
Yes.
he didn't come from the industry, so he wasn't already kind of set in the ways of and sadly it's that phrase that almost everybody hates hearing instinctually. Well, this is the way we've always done it. Anybody that doesn't cringe at that statement hasn't experienced the problems associated with it.
That is really interesting. The thing that I really am curious to know is how was he able to come in and earn respect from the technicians if he came in from an outside industry and he didn't know necessarily what they were trying to do? Is it because that he was the one who hired them all, do you think?
He was the one that hired us all, and he treated us like a team every day that he was there. It
Hmm.
was, okay, guys, what do you need from me? We're having this problem at this point. What's the problem? What do I need to do to help you solve it? It was literally he wasn't micromanaging ever. He was literally about solving problems. He was kind of like, I hate to say it, but he's like the poster boy of what a manager should be. I've had a few people like that through my career, and every time I encounter somebody like that, it's one of those things so truly thankful for is being able to work with those people because it's those people that inspire me to pass on that knowledge and that experience to the next generation.
Yeah, no, I love that. That makes sense.
It really is one of the subjects that it's the biggest thing is that everybody in the industry is affected by this. If anybody wants to continue to sell cars, we have to have technicians. It's just the way it is. And I'm in education now, but if there's no technicians, I don't have a job anymore. So it's not just, my job is to feed the dealerships and the technician shortage. And yet, if the dealership isn't selling cars because they don't have technicians, then they don't need technicians because they're not in business anymore. So it's we're all interconnected, and it's something that we need to work together to figure out.
Yeah, absolutely. And so are you aware, like, I just want to wrap up on this apprenticeship thing and see if there's any resources or things that we can help dealerships with. Because I know that Canada's a little bit different because we do mandate that they go through different processes. They have to work so many years and do so many things. Um, how does it work there? Like, how could dealerships, do they all innately have access to information about that, or are they left to their own to figure out their own apprenticeship program?
So it's kind of the part where the US kind of fell down on it. If you go through and you become an electrician or a plumber, you're required to participate in a very traditional apprenticeship, which requires so much training and so much hands-on work, and then, testing and everything to meet the requirements to be a licensed electrician, so to speak. The
Yes.
automotive industry shied away from that back in the 70s. They just said, you know what? No, we're going to police ourselves because we're trying to keep our costs down. If we require all these licenses for the technicians, it's going to cause car repair costs to go up and it's not going to be fair to the consumer. And sadly, that's one of those things to where we have things like the ASE, but yet more and more we've got dealers that are like, oh, we don't really care about ASEs because all we care about is manufacturer training. And that's kind of one of those things to where I tell my students is like the manufacturer's training is great if all you ever want to do is work for that manufacturer. But if you ever want to cross over to another brand, then you have to start all over again. Whereas ASEs is industry wide, but there's nothing required for all intents and purposes. You could walk in off the street and say, hey, I want to start working on cars for a living. And if somebody's willing to give you a chance, you're in the door and off and running.
Yeah, wow. Okay, I'm gonna dig into this because I really wanted to learn a little bit more about it. I've had some dealers reach out to me and explain a little bit about what they're doing for their apprenticeship and what's working successfully to make sure that they're the people who are leading the apprenticeship, so the experienced technicians are winning. And so
Yeah.
I think I'm going to dig into that. I'm going to dig into more about the actual apprenticeship and some resources that are available. And I'd love to chat with you again and really dig into more of this and what people can be doing or dealers could be doing to better support the students that you guys are working with.
Okay.
Awesome. I appreciate that. Well, thank you so much for having this conversation with me. I know we ran a little bit long, but I could really talk about this forever.